This video is a follow-up educational video to the first Bottrill and OTO video I uploaded the 3rd of December 2014. A recent defamatory article by Buzzfeed's Lane Sainty has prompted me to make this second video. I want David Bottrill, the ACT, Australian Capital Territory Government ACAT's Louise, Donohoe, and Buzzfeed's Lane Sainty, or one of their managers, jailed for destroying the rights of Christians, criminal defamation, using public money to stop free speech, and promoting government violence towards me. Also, B. Meager and Elizabeth Simmons from the ACAT, that is the ACT Civil and Administrative Tribunal. I've already publicly advocated for widespread judicial reform in Australia, in other videos, and also in my Voter Rights Party website, to remove judges, magistrates, and ACAT and SAT presiding members and replace them with teams of judicial officers in every Australian state, with at least 3 up the front and lawyers on both sides. The reasons are they're guilty of the list of historical and current genocidal factors I've already publicly stated and provided evidence for over the past 100 years, along with politicians, other government workers, and the corporate media people who promote them. Corporate media people making hundreds of millions of dollars out of their Liberal Labor political connection. David Bottrill is a self-confessed former treasurer and now lifelong member of the OTO, the satanic group Ordo Templi Orientis, Grand Lodge of Australia, founded in Europe by Aleister Crowley and other self-confessed Satanists. I refer to my 58-page submission in the description link for a full historical analysis of the OTO and the highly sexualised literature they published, its satanic nature, and other research videos on the OTO and Aleister Crowley. An extract of that video research is played at the end of this video. Make sure you watch it. Where Crowley confesses publicly to promote murder and rape and other evil, violent, satanic practices. His intention to destroy Christianity, and also links provided to that research video. I read an extract of the submission I filed, 58-page submission. Quote, while the OTO included from its inception the teaching of sex magic in the highest degree of the order, when Crowley became head of the order, he expanded on these teachings and associated them with different degrees as follows. 7. Masturbatory and autosexual magical techniques were taught, referred to as the lesser work of soul. 9. Heterosexual magical techniques were taught. And 11. Anal intercourse magical techniques were taught. Professor Hugh Urban, Professor of Comparative Religion at the Ohio State University, noted Crowley's emphasis on sex as the supreme magical power. Crowley wrote extensively on the topic of sex magic. Some of these works were published and made available to the general public. Others were secret and could only be obtained by initiates of Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO. Mr. Bottrill works for the Federal Department of Immigration. He and his OTO are harassing, attacking, and harming Christians in Australia using scam government workers in ACAT and SATs. That's the ACT, Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and State Administrative Tribunals. He has harmed the following Christians: myself, John Sunnell, Amber Pryor, Gwen Butler, Mr. and Mrs. Stambie-Oliffe, Raina Michelson, Arthur and Fiona Christian, Herwood Fenton, George Fakuha, Mia Madsen, Katrina Bailey, and Michael Borosowicz. Mr. Bottrill has used scam government workers in SATs and ACATs to steal tens of thousands of dollars from these defenceless Christians. The government murdered Mr. Michael Borosowicz's 2-year-old son. As a result, he founded the parents' rights group Luke's Army to help parents fight against the government's stealing of their children and other government abuses, which continues today under Liberal and Labor, federal and state. I refer the public to the link of pictures taken of a rapist statue in Canberra with a naked man and a naked boy and a toy. This statue requires a historical analysis as to which politicians and government workers funded and created it. I refer to Lane's defamatory article in the link. I've printed off other defamatory articles, print media, towards me also, and we'll be doing a separate video on corporate media people, politicians and government people who deserve to be jailed for promoting murderous, torturous, rapist and stealing politicians and their government workers, making money off them and intentionally harming and defaming myself. They keep repeating in their print articles that I stole something. However, I stole nothing. And what did I steal? In fact, they stole from me. They stole 52 days of my freedom. They stole my professional practice, and the federal and state governments combined stole roughly $400,000 from me. So they're the criminals, and I want them jailed for it. So it's criminal defamation and promoting government violence towards me, as well as stealing from me, already caused and intended to cause further serious harm to me. Miss Bailey in the article will be appealing. David Rolfe, so-called legal academic and defamation expert, is quoted in the article as saying, "The Bottrill case was interesting as it was litigated in the Civil and Administrative Tribunal, not the courts. I say those civil and administrative tribunals need to be shut down immediately, as they're used by the politicians for their government psychiatric killing, torture and stealing millions of dollars off their forcibly drugged victims via their government public trusts, and 75,858 dead citizens in a government report, Australian Bureau of Statistics 2017. Mr. Rolfe says they're not courts. Juxtaposed, I say there are no legitimate courts in Australia, as most government hearings are arbitrarily conducted in a Nazi government fascist manner with one government maggot up the front, without lawyers in the room. That is not a court. I will continue to teach the public to fight forever to have all politicians, government workers and corporate media people who harm us and destroy our rights to free speech to be removed and jailed. Anyone who tries to destroy, harm, or stop our rights to free speech deserves to be publicly shamed and exposed." Thank you.
Aleister Crowley, the man who called himself the Beast 666, black magician, drug fiend, sex addict, and traitor to the British people.
I want none of your faint approval or faint dispraise. To hell with Christianity, rationalism, Buddhism. I want blasphemy, murder, rape, revolution, anything bad or good, but strong.
We can prove that Aleister Crowley has been more influential on Western culture, popular culture, than any other human being. Now that's quite incredible because he's also the most highly regarded Satanist. And a Satanist he was. Some New Agers and some Satanists want to try to distance Crowley from being a real Satanist. However, he makes it really clear. We have quote after quote after quote who he was serving and how he was serving his god Satan. In fact, he did rituals that make it quite clear. He would grab a frog in one of his rituals and he would say, you know, "Hail under the power of Satan, I have you, Jesus of Nazareth," to the frog. And then he would crucify this frog, and speaking in terms as though he was Satan and treating this frog as though he was Jesus. This was just one of his many satanic rituals. He was a very, very evil man. He was kicked out of France and called the evilest man in the world, or the wickedest man on earth, by the popular newspapers of his day. He talked about sacrificing several children to Satan. He talked about bringing in the New World Order under the coming Antichrist. So it's very pertinent to understand that many of these musicians that lined up after him were all about anarchy and rebellion against established government, and with the idea of bringing in a new world government.
This is Edward Alexander Crowley, also known as Aleister Crowley. He styled himself the wickedest man in the world. He believed himself to be the great beast, and he changed his name to Aleister Crowley, so it would add up in both English, Hebrew, and Greek Kabbalah as 666. In 1904, Crowley had a communication with an extraterrestrial being named Iwas. And this being, through his wife, kind of a channeling type operation, brought forth a book that was called the Book of the Law in 1904. And this book declared that the slain and risen God, i.e. Jesus, had stepped off the throne, and that a new God, the crowned and conquering child, was taking his place. And as a result of this, Crowley proclaimed the end of Christianity and the start of Crowleyanity. Obviously, the guy had no self-esteem problems. In fact, he was a brilliant genius. He could play 8 chess games blindfolded. He was an accomplished poet, mountaineer, painter, writer. He had so many Masonic degrees that you could fill up 5 pages of a book with them. This guy was probably the most highly honored Mason in the world. And he was also the most dangerous man of the 20th century. And he began doing rituals to bring forth this crowned and conquering child.
The Abbey of Thelema practiced. Crowley must have had in his mind the hope that this was the beginning of his new religion.
Crowley set up the Abbey in 1920 with his latest mistress, Lieshout, their newborn baby, and a motley band of followers from around the world. Crowley met Leia in New York when she was only 19. She was totally dedicated to him and was prepared to do anything he asked of her.
I dedicate myself wholly to the great work. I will work for wickedness. I will kill my heart. I will be shameless before all men. I will freely prostitute my body to all creatures.
As people at the Abbey continued to lose their inhibitions, the sex magic rituals Crowley asked them to perform became more and more extreme.
Probably the most controversial and lurid episode in the whole Cefalù period is the attempted copulation between one of his scarlet women, Lieshout, and a goat. Now, supposedly, at the time of orgasm, the goat was to mount Lieshout, and at the time of orgasm, it was to have its throat cut. You can wonder whether what he was trying to do was, A, to test the dedication of his disciples, to see how far he could push them.
As far as Crowley was concerned, it was an experiment in a different kind of living. There were piles of drugs on the table. The children ran around naked and were allowed to sort of come into the room while adults were having sex. Crowley believed that if you gave man absolute freedom to do exactly what he wanted, this could do nothing but good.
It was evidently not the most pleasant place to stay. The members were prone to disease, discomforts of various kinds, most of which could only be alleviated by faith in Crowley himself and the ready supply of drugs, which Crowley made sure were readily available. Amongst all of this, you have to imagine that there was also a family atmosphere, albeit a very dysfunctional one. Think Charles Manson rather than the Waltons, I think.
Prior to becoming the leader of a cult, Charles Manson spent years digesting the drug-ridden and occult world of Haight-Ashbury and fancied himself as a movie producer. Manson was deeply worshipful of Satan and encouraged his family of followers to be as well.
Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something.
Convicted member of the Manson clan, Susan Atkins, said, in time, he was to call himself Satan and the devil sometimes.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left. There'd be none of you left. There'd be none of you left.
His followers were brainwashed into compliance. Using music and movies, Manson was able to get inside the heads of his followers and lay whatever foundation he wanted. Family members who resided with Manson at the movie ranch have described how Manson would play movies over and over all night long. These were used to indoctrinate and break down the inhibitions of his followers. One family member stated, the family had things where they'd show flicks. They were running 4 or 5 movies at once, you know, playing tapes at the ranch. For movie screens, they hung up white sheets for these grim events. And the films shown seem to have been reels of family happenings, music, the knife dance, lots of sex, but other films also. This set the stage for Manson to further twist their impressionable minds.
We are what you have made us. We were brought up on your TV. We were brought up watching Gunsmoke, Have Gun Will Travel, FBI, Combat. This guy you were looking to for, entertainment or whatever you want to call it, was killing all through the show. Every show we ever watched was all killing. All those old-time gangster movies where, it was all exciting. They were in the cars with the low hats on and they were cruising and they were shooting out the windows, or, it was all exciting. And we are what you made us.
Let us not forget that in TV we have the greatest instrument for mass persuasion in the history of the world.
In 1971, Timothy Leary had an epiphany during a tarot reading that utilized a set of cards designed by Crowley. His revelation? That he was Crowley reborn and was to complete the work Crowley began, preparing humanity for cosmic consciousness. Leary acknowledged this powerful connection with the great beast in a letter to Wilson, observing that the coincidences, synchronicities between my life and his are embarrassing. From this connection flowed frequent references to Crowley, his philosophy, and their common destinies in Leary's writings and speech.
Well, I've been an admirer of Aleister Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago, and I think the 60s themselves. Crowley said he was in favor of finding your own self and do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law under love. It was a very powerful statement. I'm sorry he isn't around now to appreciate the glories that he started.
The phrase, do what thou wilt, was taken from the Book of the Law, Crowley's most renowned work, and one whose composition is worth understanding in the context of our study. While visiting Egypt in 1904, Crowley's first wife, Rose, began going into spontaneous trances, muttering things like, "They are waiting for you," and "He who was waiting was Horus." Intrigued, Crowley and Rose went to visit the Cairo Museum. From a distance she spied a glass case and exclaimed, there he is." Upon inspection, the case did contain an image of Horus painted on a wooden stele. But what particularly stunned Crowley was its exhibit number, 666, his number, the number of the beast. Convinced now that something supernatural was happening, Crowley went back to his hotel and performed a ritual, summoning this higher power. Over 3 successive days, beginning on April 8th, the book was channeled through Crowley while in a trance. And the content of this revelation? "I am the snake that giveth knowledge," the Spirit said. "To worship me take wine and strange drugs, whereof I will tell my prophet." Falling on precisely the wrong side of the Bible's account concerning the fall of man and Satan's role, this snake spirit begins the revelation by telling man that he is a god, that reality is essentially an illusion, sin a myth, and that ethically there's no greater commandment than the law of Thelema, Greek for will, as famously stated in the 40th verse of chapter 1.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Where?
To wherever your heart tells you to go.
To children's videos.
When you follow your heart.
This flake of feel-good wisdom has become the great law, the only politically correct commandment for a culture wherein truth is relative,
Truth is whatever you believe is right.
man is good, and God is whatever you want him, her, or it to be.
There are no absolute truths. I mean, even God doesn't work that way.
But think for just a moment. Aren't most or even all the things that people say and do determined ultimately by the desires of their hearts?
We're born with the concept of right and wrong.
Without some absolute standard of right and wrong, what's to keep a cute children's song from becoming the score for man's descent into lust, murder, and anarchy.
When there's people in your life trying to tell you what is right, what do you do? Listen to your heart, girl. Do you take a brand new road or the one you've always known? Am I getting through? Listen to your heart, girl. Listen to your heart, girl. Listen to your heart, girl. 'Cause the heart's not gonna lie to you. Listen to your heart, girl. Listen to your heart, girl. And I know you'll always be hearing the truth if you listen to your heart.
I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to.
You gotta listen to your heart.
As we saw earlier in this series, the reason this do what you want, it's your thing, follow your heart theology is wrong, and ultimately even satanic, is because our hearts and minds have been profoundly deranged by the effects of sin. The heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Every way of a man is right in his own eyes. There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. And perhaps most direct of all, he who trusts in his own heart is a fool. From mankind's fall from grace to virtually every evil ideology that has blighted this travailing planet, ignoring our Creator's commands and doing instead what seems right in our own eyes and hearts, has been the fountain from which sin and its wages have flowed.
I think it should be brought out that we not only condone, we encourage all types of what would be called sexual perversities and deviations, because we feel that in a few short years it'll be established that everyone is a sexual deviant, pervert, fetishist.
We're happy to be here. We feel that historically we are part of this movement for liberation.
All my life been attracted to younger boys. I love them.
How do I make myself attractive to boys?
We feel a person should be free to indulge in all of the so-called fetishes, all of the so-called aberrations that they would so desire.
Through the decades, Hollywood has fueled the fires of this lie by peddling greater and greater waves of filth to numb our consciences. And like the frog in the proverbial pot, we are almost cooked. True freedom comes by turning from sin to Jesus Christ, who gives the abundant life. Jesus said,
"You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free."